This daily drawing exercise is a bit of natural landscape near where I live, and particularly it's practice in sketching natural rock formations. And we have this wonderful, enormous rock that sits just above the entrance to a trail. And I thought this would be a good scene to practice doing some fairly quick, reasonably gestural drawings of such a formation, where we're dealing with the shape of the rocks, which are fairly random, but also various formations within them and on them, and also the ways in which their irregular forms cast shadows. So there's quite a bit to worry about in this. Now, this drawing took me 23 minutes to draw, and you're seeing it in double time. So if you want to watch me draw this in real time, you can just use that little cog icon to make the video half speed. But for now, we'll continue at double speed. And so I'm putting some of these little shadow spots and other marks to try and indicate the rock formation, the layers of rock which were formed one on top of the other. So I realize at this stage, of course, that I haven't taken the top of the rock up, curving up enough on the left-hand side. I've dropped it down too quickly, which annoys me the entire time I'm drawing this, but I resist the urge to start again because we need to push through that sense of it has to be perfect. And so now I'm working on some of the rocks underneath. It's almost like a giant turtle shell in some ways, isn't it? It's a little less straightforward with the rocks that are underneath. They're more a series of rocks that are in the process of breaking apart into smaller rocks, as opposed to the rock on top, which I think at some stage rolled down from further up the gorge. And now I managed to draw something that's vaguely skull-shaped in the lower left corner. We can see the two eyes there already, and I do nothing to make it look less skull-like. So it's when I used to paint and you'd end up with a face on the bark of a tree. So really I'm just exploring the forms and extending out and trying to do some of the foliage that's in front of the rock. It's easier just to leave it all out, and yet it does create something of the effect to have the visual clutter. And the way things such as these leaves and branches break up the effect of the shadows behind them. So I think it's a good discipline to try and leave in everything we possibly can and to seek to find marks that will create the effect of what we're looking at. Particularly in our drawing exercises, we want to leave in the challenges because that's how we discover ways to create more visual effects than we currently can. There's quite a lot of hatching and cross-hatching. Look, there's no right or wrong for any of this. Whatever direction you think is going to work best, and which I think for myself, the principle I try and use is to reflect the underlying form of the shape that the hatching is on. But if you think another way looks better, then go with it. And just do it differently, just to explore a different possibility. This is what these exercises are like. They're ways we can explore. We're not starting them expecting an artwork at the end. We're expecting a lot of marks on the paper. Now, there is some grass down the front here. There is a signpost which is quite buried in the centre of this. And I made the mistake of making it dark without observing carefully enough to realise that, in fact, there's shadow behind it and the sun reflects off it. So it would have been better if I'd left it pretty much white paper, except just a hint of lettering, and could have therefore brought the shadows up around it. If you've been noticing that slightly swinging, creaking door just behind me, I've stopped this and closed it so you won't hear it anymore. So, working now at just defining some of this main rock in perhaps the more complex parts. And this is where I think, particularly in a sketch, it's helpful not to try and do everything exactly in the reference. We are trying to capture the effect with rocks, but remember, it's good to try and avoid long, continuous straight lines. Generally, I find they're an unsatisfactory way of creating or of capturing the feel of the rocks, where often the surfaces are curving away from us, and therefore they don't really give the feeling of a hard edge. It's more of a softer look, and sometimes a very light line or a light line made up of several sections of line can work better at that. And then there's sort of more grass and foliage towards the base, and there's a bit of a steep rise in the ground just alongside towards the right, and I'm hoping to capture the feel that the ground is moving up in that direction. But there's a fair bit of hatching underneath in there, and just trying to work out what direction to put the lines, so a little more time in studying the reference to understand, in general terms at least, where the rocks are going. But little dots and dashes and several very small hatching lines together are often good marks to use or to consider using in drawing natural rock features. So working on my skull again. Goodness me. At least it's not so much like a human skull. I think because when we draw, we often focus so much on just the one part of what we're doing that we don't step back and consider the overall effect of how it's going to look. So I'm reasonably happy now with my rocks. I have spent longer, as I said, it took me just over 20 minutes to do this drawing. But I do want to still suggest something of the trees around it to give it some context and possibly a sense of scale as well. So I don't want to get very heavy with my line work here, and I don't want to get too dark with anything I draw or hatch, because I want the center of gravity to be underneath this heavy rock. I want that to be what is the place where the weight of the drawing is. But I also want to get a sense of the jaggy, disjointed feel of the bush around. And also these trees coming up vertically, almost at right angles to the rock, are a great visual contrast to what we've already drawn. They give us a very strong vertical, where we've had generally a more of a horizontal feel to the visual impact that we've been creating. And there are some plants as well, some shrubby things, and I don't want to get caught up into too much detail with those. I'll do a few more of those again, but I do realise there are some shadowed areas I hadn't finished underneath the rock because of this very spindly shrub that came up in front of it. I just was leaving it till I had a greater sense of exactly where things started and finished. So I'm just working on trying to define this shrub by negative space by drawing the parts of the shadows that we can see through the foliage, because of course the sunlight is on the bush. Speaking of which, here's a few more shrubby bush things behind. And then the ground level does slope upwards behind, going 45 degrees in the other direction. So I want to give a sense of there are now changing ground levels around this. And I felt that larger tree on the right-hand side did anchor things quite nicely as well. So there's one more little spindly. They look as though they're barely hanging on, but they'll be here for decades after I've gone. These little spindly plants that we have that just seem to live in sand and total neglect. So a few last marks to represent some of the mossy shapes that are on the rock, and these are shapes that we can also foreshorten as the rock curves back as well. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you have a go at this natural rock formation. It's a great exercise for having to create all sorts of visual effects with creative mark making. So why not give it a go? And of course, you'll find the reference photo on my channel community page. But look, whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.